Welcome. Today we're going to look at metadata in Greenstone. Metadata is the basis for all our indexes, both the search indexes and browsing indexes, so we have to have a good understanding of what we need to put here. You should all be familiar with metadata from your cataloging courses where we look at the MARC record metadata set. In a library, the MARC metadata set and the values are used to build indexes. For example, in a library OPAC here, we see there's a language index indicating the data values attached to the records and the number of records that match. So for example, English, there's 78 records with that as the data value. We see there's a subject one with 700 non-fiction, 500 fiction. Now Greenstone works exactly the same way. Here are some Greenstone indexes from past projects, and we can see they look very similar to the indexes in the library OPAC. We've got a subject index up here with biology, computer engineering. We have a personal name index to the right of that with Laura Klink and George Klink. And then we have another one on here for locations. So what you have to do is decide what indexes you need for your users and create the metadata values and add them to your records. Now Greenstone doesn't use MARC records metadata set, but it does use a number of other metadata sets. By default, you get the extracted metadata set, the EX one, which will automatically extract metadata contained in the digital files. Some of the Greenstone plugins have options for extracting additional metadata. There's also the Dublin Core, the standard Dublin Core 15-element metadata set. There's a default that is used quite a bit. Now Dublin Core is designed by librarians, but strangely enough, it's rather hard to use to catalog bibliographic records. It was designed to catalog web resources, so depending on your type of content, it may or may not be suitable. One of the design decisions for a digital architect is in fact whether I have to use manual cataloging metadata at all. The extracted metadata set can work quite well, we used some of it last week, if the metadata in your digital files is good. Now typically a lot of files, particularly if you downloaded them off the internet, have very bad or incorrect metadata. However, this can be corrected. If you have the program that created the file, for example, if you have a Word file, you can open Word and fix the metadata. If you have some images, you may have software that can manipulate the metadata in the images. If you've got audio files, there's a lot of programs like MP3 Tag that allow you to fix up the metadata in those. The benefit of this approach is the metadata travels with the file and thus never has to be re-entered. So for example, if you had created a Greenstone collection and cataloged a bunch of files with the metadata and then managed to delete or ruin your collection, you'd have to re-enter all the metadata. So one option sometimes is, how good is the metadata in the files I have? In addition to the default metadata sets, the EX extracted one and the standard Dublin Core, you can also use a qualified Dublin Core, which adds more metadata elements, but there's other ones here too that you can add. There's an RFC 1807, which is designed for bibliographic records. In fact, you can even download MARC records from a library catalog and convert them into 1807 format, and they work very, very well. If none of those metadata sets that are available meet the needs of your content and users, you can create your own metadata set. Here on the right we see one has created a DCS, they've called it, and they have a bunch of metadata that they needed for this particular project, which a collection of plays, I believe. Okay, let's test this out and see how it's going to work. Run the GLI, create a new collection. We'll call it week 5. And then what we're going to do is bring in one file. I've created this image of, it's a screenshot of a web page, and I've placed it in the Dropbox in week 5. So go to the Gather tab, browse off to your home folder, the Dropbox LIS9720, week 05, and drag and drop the port PNG file into your collection window. And if we take a look at the content here, we see it's an article from Wine Access magazine on port wine, and talks about port. Has two authors, has an illustrator, has a URL, has been published by someone, and what we're going to do is catalog this. Oh, by the way, Graham's late bottled vintage is quite nice, so it's highly recommended. Okay, what I want you to do is take you can pause the video, take a look at cataloging this to see how you do. You may want to consult that Dublin Core handout of the 15 elements of what goes there and figure out, what do I put in type, for example? How do I put in the person's names? What goes in format? Is there an identifier I should put in? So the idea is to get a sense of what should you put in different places. It's better to put the right thing in the right place because it means your cataloging records are a little bit more interoperable with other collections. If you put just stuff anywhere, it's not very good. Now, I should make a disclaimer here. I'm not a cataloger. I don't do any cataloging, so if any of you are professional catalogers, you can feel free to critique of what I've done here. I just took an attempt at putting some stuff in. So I've added the title, the two authors, and last name, first name. I did look up in the Library of Congress subject headings to get port wine, though. I did put the publisher information as both Canoe and Netgraph, and I put in Mr. Krabs as an illustrator. I've got DC contributor role. This would be quite handy because we could build an index based on roles. For example, an editor, a translator, an illustrator. So that would be a useful index for certain types of collections. Now, when it comes to putting in the date, I wasn't sure what to do. The first one I did, the 2003-0522, I know because that's the way Greenstone stores dates internally. But I also thought it doesn't look very nice, so I put in 2003-0522, and we'll see how that works out. Because I do want to build a date index. If you had a collection of articles, it would be very useful to be able to have a date list where you could drill down by date. Now I also added some metadata that I could see what might be useful for other types of index. You notice my type 1, the resource type, I added article. You could see an index here based on type. Maybe there's article, thesis, white paper, things like that. So I could have different types of documents in there in case the user wanted to drill down that way. The format one, I looked at the MIME internet types and used text/HTML. I'm not sure that's the best choice, but I was also confused by where to put resource identifier, the URL to the thing. Should I put that in DC source or should I put it there? And this caused problems when I had where do I put the journal title? Dublin Core, not so easy to do bibliographic cataloging, is my conclusion. Anyway, I did put a language code in. I used the Library of Congress to get a LC number. I used Canada as the coverage, and I put the copyright notice in as well. Next thing I wanted to do was to test out my dates. Is my format correct? Because we've known from past experience that if your date format is incorrect, it causes huge trouble. In fact, it may cause your collection to crash and not build. So what I want to do is create a new index, and I went off to design, add classifier. I selected date lists from the pull down menu, and I set the metadata to be DC date, and then I built the collection to take a look at, see what happened. Now to make it more realistic and to get a better sense of what was going to happen, I just grabbed a couple of other files and dragged them in, and I just assigned some dates to them in various dates. And then I took a look at this when I built it, and actually it works out fairly well. The date list looks like to be a simple list type of index as opposed to an AZ compact list, and it does add a different icon for getting to the file. Now we could change that again. We know how to customize the icon, so that's not a difficulty. But the date is formatted here, a year and then month, and you have the records. So it looks like it works fairly well. Now the next test I wanted to do is, what if I had a record that had multiple dates? Not sure why I would have this, but I did. So you notice I've added 6 or 7 DC date data in different formats, both in the dash format and the Greenstone internal format. And then I change the code in the format string for the date list index and use the sibling bracket all separated by a blank line carriage return, the HTML code, the BR, to put a blank line, separate line, and formatted the DC date. Now what I wanted to do is to see what would happen. When I did this, I discovered you can display all of those values, right? And they're all there. And the ones I put with dashes look okay, but the other ones that I didn't use dashes don't get formatted at all. They just come out as the way they're stored. So that's not great. I've also noticed that there's only one index entry. So the index picks up the first value, the 2003 May, to create the record entry, but ignores all the other ones. So you can display them, but they're ignored for index purposes. Let's go back and think about our problem of where to put things. This is a case where somebody is creating a collection of, let's say, lesson plans. So they're going to need a number of indexes that would be useful as access points for the user. Maybe user has a question, I don't have that much time, I need lessons plans under 45 minutes or an hour. So a time index would be useful. Notice here they have put the timing in DC contributor. Not so good. But it will work. I mean, it's just not good cataloging. The next one, maybe they want to indicate what type of it is. So here they've got a worksheet or other things in there that would be valuable for that. Finally, they may have something to indicate what's level, grade level, or skill level, I guess. Elementary, junior high, middle school, high school, whatever, things like that. So this is handy. They can use this certainly to create their indexes, but maybe they're not using the Dublin Core metadata set in the best way. Here's another example. This is one on medical resources available in London, and they have created a number of indexes. What type of service it is, they put that in resource type. They've also got a location one because you want to know what's close to me, and that's in the resource identifier. You notice they're using postal codes there as a geographic locator. Interesting one here is they get DC source. That holds the bus route number, so they can link that to the LTC bus routes. Well, that's a very good value added thing. But again, here we see the difficulty is when trying to describe their collection, the 15 Dublin Core elements don't really work that well. So the question is, should we maybe use the qualified Dublin Core? Will that work better? Well, let's take a look. Now you can replace the existing Dublin Core with the qualified. You can't have both of them active at the same time. There's only room for the one namespace, so you have to choose which. Now the qualified adds a lot more things, a lot of qualifiers and refinements and different schemes. So it may work out that this could be what you need. Now to change your default metadata set, click on Enrich. Then click Manage Metadata Sets, click Add, and it'll show you a list of metadata sets. Select the qualified Dublin Core entry, click Add, then click OK and click Close. You'll now have additional metadata elements that you can catalog your record or records. So let's test this out. Click on Enrich and select the one record there, and now I'm going to add a few dates. I'm going to add them using the YYYY-MM-DD. I highly recommend you use that for your date format. It seems to work the best. So you notice I've added an accepted, created, available, copyrighted, submitted, or whatever. So I have multiple things around dates. Let's see what happens when we create and build it. Now once it's built, I don't want to preview it yet because it's not going to look like anything, because the default format of that index will not display this additional metadata by default. So it's off to Format, Format Features, and choose CL2. That's our classifier to the date list. And we're going to change the format string to insert some of our new metadata elements. Rather than just typing them in, it's a lot less prone to error if you click on the Insert Variable drop down and use that to select the metadata element you want to put in. Now that we have the format statement finished, let's preview it and take a look. You notice we now have the additional metadata displayed in the YYYYMMDD format that it was entered, which is good. Now I'm going to add one more thing to that format string. The last line I've now put in, I'm going to put a blank line of BR, I'll put a label, a date label, and then I'm going to put the DC date metadata element in, but I'm going to add the format macro to it beforehand. So I'm going to put format :DC date, and then I'm going to preview this. Now what do I get now? A nicely formatted date. So what this format macro does is take the internally stored date, which is just YYYYMMDD, and format in a nicer way. So that's kind of nice. Now that formatted date is so nice, I decide to try it with my qualified Dublin core, with the date accepted, the available created, and all that. So I changed my format statement, but when I preview it, what do I see? The macro doesn't seem to work. It shows the macro, and then at the end it shows the date, but it makes a big mess. So I don't think you can do that. Right now I don't know a way around it, unfortunately. So if the regular Dublin core doesn't meet the needs of your collection and the qualified is not meeting your needs, what can you do? Well, there are two options. You can modify an existing metadata set or create your own metadata set. This is done through the metadata set editor. What we'll do is first close your collection in the GLI. So you can keep the GLI open, but just close your collection. And then if you go off to Programs, Greenstone, Metadata Set Editor, it runs the METs. What you can do this now is from there do File Open and choose a metadata set to modify. So let's say we choose the development library subset example. Now you'll notice the DLS metadata set is a minimalist approach. There's 1, 2, 3, only 5 elements in it. So this gives us a chance maybe to take this and start adding things we'd want. For example, we didn't think Dublin Core did a very good job at bibliographic stuff, so why not use this? So what you can do is select the DLS at the top, right click and choose Add Element. And here I've added a new element, and I'm going to call it Journal. And what I'm going to do here is hold the journal title in DLS Journal. I might also decide to make some space to hold the volume, maybe the issue, various other things like that. So here I'm adding them as sub-elements to DLS Journal. I'm not sure if that's proper, but it gives me now a way of keeping the volume number and the issue number for my journal, which was not that easy to do in Dublin Core. Now you can continue to add metadata elements or change the existing ones. You can delete ones that are there, edit them, and add things you want. When you're finished, what you want to do is save your changes. So you can do File Save. It will modify this metadata set. Now, obviously you only want to do this on your own computer and not in the shared computers in the lab. What I'm going to do now is modify the existing standard Dublin Core by adding a new sub-element. You do it by opening up the Dublin Core, selecting, in this case, DC Rights, and right-clicking, and I've added a sub-element called DRM to indicate whether there's digital rights management restrictions on that particular file. Now, once I've saved the changes to my metadata set and then exited the metadata set editor, I'm going to open up my collection again. So back to the GLI, File Open, and I'll choose Week 5. And then click on Enrich, and what do we see? Interestingly enough, you notice I now will have some things there that weren't there before. What I'm going to do also, I can click on Manage Metadata Sets and do additional things. To take a look at the additional things I've created, I have to click on Manage Metadata Sets, then click Add, select Dublin Core, because I made the change to the standard one, click OK and close. So now I should see my DRM, and there it is. You know, so under Digital Rights Management, we can see I now have a DRM sub-element. The neat thing about this as well, you notice, all the stuff that was in the qualified Dublin Core that had data in it was also brought over. So this is really neat. So if you made changes or put data into one, you can actually bring it all into the other. So it's all still there. So I'm quite happy about that, including all my DC date variations. And I'm not done adding metadata sets. Now, while you can only have one Dublin Core metadata set active, you can have other ones in. So I'm going to do add metadata set. I'm going to manage them, add another one. I'm going to select the development library subset where we added a bunch of things, volume, issue, journal. And I'm going to bring that in to my collection. Now, once the DLS metadata set has been added, I'm going to click Enrich, select my record, scroll on down, and now I can put a place to put my journal title. So I'm going to put it in DLS Journal, Wine Access Magazine. And maybe I'll put the volume in and the issue in too. I made those up. But now I have a bit of space to put things that make sense. So I can store the data in a metadata element appropriate for that data type. Now the next task to do is to modify the format features for the CL2 date list to display my additional metadata. So I've gone off to the HTML format string and I've added a blank line, journal as a label, and then I'm going to do the insert variable. I can select from the list DLS journal and then later DLS journal volume and issue, and I'll put those all in. So here's the completed code for my format string for the CL2 classifier. And when I preview it, we see there's my record. Port is booming in Canada. I've got the journal, the volume, the issue, and the date all displayed. So this works out really well using 2 or 3 metadata sets. I can use 4 or more. So I should be able to incorporate just about anything I have to keep track of. So here's what I ended up with. I have 4 metadata sets in my collection. I have Dublin Core, which has been modified for my purposes. I've got the RFC, I've got the DLS, which I've modified, and I've got the extracted one, the EX metadata set. So I think I should be okay. So that should give you an overview of how metadata works in Greenstone. The tricky bit is, again, you have to decide what are the useful access point. What are my users? Who are my users? What information needs do they have? From that, you can go backwards to build access points or design what they need and then figure out which metadata you have to put in to your records. Now, in putting in metadata, it helps whenever possible to use standards, to use authorities, to make it as consistent and interoperable as possible. You may find if you're going to do it with metadata sets, there's a Greenstone tutorial. There's also documents on metadata in the Dropbox and in the lecture notes for the website. So having that design work done now means that later on you don't have to do that at all. Adding more records will be simple because it's the same process. You've already worked it all out, and then you can concentrate towards the end on making it look nice.